I'm appreciative of your having me here today. It's a great pleasure to be here in Sri Lanka with you. But it's right after lunch, and what a nice lunch we had. It is like the hardest time to keep you guys awake, isn't it? So what I want you to do is we're going to do some acting. So what I want you to do is take out an electronic device, just a pretend one, and hold it in your hand. So it could be a smartphone, it can be an iPad, it can be a computer. Just put it in your hand, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to do an exercise. So what I want you to do is use that device like an old person would do it. So how would that old person use that device? Come on, act! How does the old person do it? They just sit there and look at me. You reckon that's what an old person does? So how old is that old person? How old is that old person? How old's an old person? It's not a trick question. How? 70. Anyone think an old person's any younger than that? You're an old person. So around 70. An old person, everyone agreed? Around 70? 60? That's right, anyone older than you is an old person. Okay, take your device out again. Put it in your hand. How does a young person use a device? Really quick? How do they? And how old is a young person? How old? How old's a young person, guys? 25, yeah? So is that what I heard? Perfect. All right. So how do I use a device? And how old do you think I am? This is not a trick question. I asked you, how old do you think I am? Somebody take a guess. Go on. Somebody take a guess. How old do you think I am? 40. I love you. I'm actually 54. So I'm actually 15 years away from being an old person, according to you. And if you think about it, how an old person and the way we think an old person uses devices is actually quite different than we think a young person uses a device. So, I'm your old person. So what we're going to do today is we're going to think about how we think about when we design products or how we think about ICT in the delivery of the end user. But there's a few global megatrends that are going to change the way we live. And these are Australian global trends, but I think they probably go across any company, any country. The first one is more from less. And that one talks about that we have limited supplies of natural resources. The second one is going, gone. And that talks about the world's natural habitats, and there's a decline or a distinction. The next one is the Silk Highway, and that is that the economy is shifting from the west to the east and from the north to the south. It has a big change in the way we see things. Forever Young, it's the aging of a population as an asset. Virtually Here, which is around having a much more of a virtual world. And Great Expectations. So there's a rising demand for experiences, as well as the importance of social relationships. And that doesn't mean social relationships through technology. That's person-to-person relationships and experiences. So you can see, when you guys are doing your work, these are the trends that are going to shape the outcomes of what you're doing. And that's very similar to what the speaker this morning was talking about. these are the things that these are the context in which you're delivering your products and your services and your research. So with new services and products, you have to think about what are you developing and why. So what is your goal? Are you trying to solve a problem or a gap in the market? Are you developing something completely new and completely different? But the real thing that we want to talk about is who determines the what and the why. Who determines what the problem is? And who determines why we do it? So there's a number of ways you can think about consumer interactions, or interactions with your customers or the end user. First one is around education. And I think this is probably the traditional one. We need to educate people to use our products or our services. You've ever heard that before? This is a standard one, and this is where the expert actually decides what the problem is, and the expert decides what the solution is, and then teaches us how to do that. And the difficulty is, though, that if the end user doesn't use that particular product or service in the way that it should be, it's the fault of the end user, because they haven't listened to the expert. So education's all driven down, and it's all driven from the expert to basically deciding what is the problem and also the solution. Then the other way of thinking about it is around engagement. Now, engagement is a little bit different, but again, the expert decides what the problem is, and often what the solution is. And what happens in that exchange is that then the expert will put it in front of the end user, and the end user will give feedback. And that end user the expert may or may not take on what the end user has said, and then the product is delivered. Engagement can be a little bit different than that, but I've seen in industry that's pretty well what happens. They listen sometimes, but not other times, and engagement can be one way, or it can be a two-way street. The other way that you'd be familiar with is co-creation. And I'm sure a lot of you have been doing co-creation or design-led or so forth, where the actual problem is determined by the end user. And the designer helps to, I guess, shape that problem, but the problem is actually defined by the end user, and the solution is also created by the end user. So if it's not being used as it is intended to, that's probably highly unlikely, because they've actually designed it and delivered it for themselves. But the thing is, each of these, I guess, strategies are used in different ways at different points in time. But the one thing that is true, that influences everything, is your lens. It's the way you see the world. That actually will determine how you are working within education, or whether you're working with an engagement, or also in co-creation, how you see the world and how you see the end user will drive that whole process. Because you have, and I'll talk about the ways we know in a minute, but actually you will only hear pretty much what you want to hear. We all do that. We all hear what's common to us and what we want to hear. So even if we're co-creating with consumers, actually what they tell us is what we want to hear, or what we're likely to hear, because it's our filters that do the listening. So the ways of knowing that we all know: we all have authority figures in our world. We sometimes call them our bosses. They might be our parents, they might be community leaders. Research, there's a whole, you might get research from a variety of different places, but they're authority. Second is tradition. We all have traditions. And being in here in Sri Lanka over the last couple of days, you guys have a lot of traditions and ways of doing things. And we have that in Australia too. There's traditional ways of approaching things, and traditional ways of seeing things. Common sense. That makes sense, doesn't it? Common sense tells you that you do it this way. But what's interesting is that your common sense will be a little bit different than my common sense. So it's a little bit, how do we think about that? Then there's the media myth. Media gives us a lot of information. We get it through TV, we get it through social media. There's a lot of different ways that we receive information, and they can shape, TV shapes the way we think and what we believe. And our personal experience. So your interactions with me will give you an impression about maybe some Australians or a woman who's 54 or a variety of things. So your experience and the things that you've done in your life shape the way you see the world. So what we want to think about is when we're designing, it actually drives the way we perceive things. In Australia, young people are seen as exciting, doing all sorts of amazing things like getting your first car, getting your first house, having a family, and your career. So a lot of the tools and supports are around keeping you engaged in the community so that you can get on in your job, you can engage with life, and you can have all sorts of exciting times, and you're productive to the community. However, for when you hit 50 in Australia, you get the black balloon for your birthday party. It's the beginning of the end. It's not real fun, and a lot of people have real dramas at 50. Does that happen in Sri Lanka? I don't know, do you guys have the black balloon? And then there's the caution, retirement ahead. Oh my goodness, watch out. And if you're really lucky when you're old, you get to hang out and have afternoon tea and scones. And when you're old, you get to be joined by a very cute nurse, and she'll help you down the hallway. That's what you've got to look forward to. And really, a lot of people don't see older people as productive. Now, the reason I'm actually telling you about younger people and older people is not necessarily that you're going to be designing for them, but it's a bit of a case study and a bit of an example of how to look at how we think about different people. Because in Australia, we actually think older people are basically don't have a lot of use. And so when they leave the job market, there's nothing there for them except for this. And it's because we see in Australia that when you hit about 40, you're at your peak, and then it's downhill after that. So it's, and there's the tsunami of the baby boomers, there's the drain on the economy, we get all that every day. And that's actually driven by a theoretical basis. And in Australia, and around in like the US and the UK, many years ago there was a theory called disengagement theory. And that theory actually talked about older people withdrawing from meaningful roles, so that they would withdraw so that they could let young people take the jobs. Have you heard that before? Does anyone talk about that in Sri Lanka? That the old people should basically retire so the young people can take the jobs? We hear that in Australia, still hear that. And it frees older people from responsibility. They frame it as me time. You can have me time when you're old. But that moved on into activity theory and also continuity theory, which in continuity theory says basically you're the same as you are all throughout your life. So that you're, if you're active when you're young, you're probably going to be active when you're older. But I wanted to talk about symbolic interactionism, because we actually develop our identity through social interactions. And we actually modify our identity as we interact with people. In Australia, we call it peer pressure. Have you ever heard peer pressure? You guys got peer pressure with young people? And you want to make sure they have a good group of friends, because if they don't, they'll change and go with the bad group of kids or whatever. Same is true all throughout our lives, is that we actually modify our behavior, how people interact with us and how people I guess how the built and the natural environment, how that interacts with us, we shape how we feel. So, and aging frameworks have moved on. They've moved on to successful aging, which really has a health focus. It's aging is healthy aging clearly has a health and wellness focus, and active aging is all around health as well. And health, this is the World Health Organization. They have health is out the front, and it's supported by participation and security. So in Australia and in America and in the UK and maybe in Sri Lanka, everything about older people is all around health. Is that the same here? So no or yes? You have to nod your head yes or no. So, and you probably have heard this, and I've asked a number of folks in Australia and also over in America, do you agree? If you have your health, you have everything. When you do not have your health, nothing else matters at all. And it's amazing, every single time people agree with me that that's what it is. If you have your health, you have everything. But let's think about that, because if that's and this is the way that all the ICT for older people is being designed. It's being designed because it's underpinned by health. So what you get in terms of thinking about health for older people, everything is all around bicycles. It's around, how many of you have been riding your bike down a forest lane? Been doing that lately? Or how about running on a treadmill? Want to do that all day, every day? Or yoga? That'd be fun, but do we want to do it all day? And you can have your healthy eating. But what that then translates to for older people is you get to have help when you do things. People carry you to the places that you need to be. And you get to smile lovingly up at the person who's helping you. And then again, you get your cute nurse to help you. So it's interesting because this is a PhD student of ours. She did a quick look at all the apps that are designed for older people. And every single app but one was actually designed to monitor people or for health. And what I mean by monitoring, knowing where they are, what they're doing, and how they're doing it. So then you monitor their heart, you monitor their breathing, they monitor all sorts of stuff. And a colleague of mine is so excited because they're developing a monitoring toilet, so that if you go to the toilet, it's a diagnostic toilet. It can tell you what you ate, what you drank, what your mood is, and your health. So that's what's coming up for old people, is you're going to get monitored. On the other side is the health, so it monitors what you eat, the steps you've taken, all that sort of stuff. Only one was actually about connecting and participation. So just about everything that you guys are designing for people is all around health. So this is actually from a smart city. I just looked up a smart city app, and if you can have a look, see the old lady? She's looking for the hospital. There's another old lady in the back, and she's looking for the doctor because she's having a heart attack. So this is what we think about older people. So I don't know about you, but this is what you get if that's what you design for. This is what has been actually delivered in America. Oh, let's see.
Hi, I'm Homer, your home medical robot and companion.
Homer is a tabletop medical companion robot who will care for you and will become your friend and helper. Homer will always ask you how you're feeling during the day.
Good morning, Helen. How are you today? It's time for your 10 a.m. medication.
You can talk and interact with Homer day or night. He will remind you of appointments. Homer comes with a mobile app so you can stay in touch when you're away. Homer makes taking your medications fun and easy. Homer will only dispense your medications to you at the correct, pre-programmed designated times. Homer will sing with you,
Fa-la-la-la-la.
and play games, help you remember things, and even tell you a bedtime story. With his two-way video screen, he will keep you in touch day or night with a nurse, family member, or 911.
I can do many things, but most of all, I want to be a friend.
Homer, the home medical robot, a modern companion in a world of evolving healthcare needs.
So, who wants Homer? So you reckon what I'm going to do with Homer? That's what happens when you design for old people for health. This is what you get. And I don't know that anybody here wants to be at home with Homer and that's all you're home with. Can you imagine that that's the thing you interact with all the time? Here's from Japan, IBM, Apple, and Japan Post. This is from last year. They're going to give all old people, get this, iPads and a few apps. Again, it's because they see old people as monitoring their health and buying goods and services. There's no idea that they might actually do anything else. And this is what we get from Toyota. And what you get here is that you've got the robot, and the robot can be manually operated by the son who's in another city, or it can be manually operated by the guy in the bed, and it can go and get water, it can open up the drapes, it can get various things. But what's really interesting is that there's no expectation that that man will get out of bed. There's absolutely no expectation that he's actually has no ability to get up and open up that curtain by himself. So what he's going to end up doing is laying in that bed and becoming more and more disabled. Because if you don't use your body, what happens to you? So this is going to be me, and this is what you're designing for me in 10 years. So it's interesting because we as researchers, we actually did a study, and we surveyed a whole lot of older people around the things that they, that they were happy about. It's a standard quality of life survey that we did, and the things that we found with those guys is that they liked a lot of things, and some of the things weren't so great in their lives. And as you see, as you go down there, that their average decreased, so their satisfaction decreased. And the things that they talked about here were around capacity for work, reliance on medical treatment, and so forth. And one of my colleagues, who at the time had a mother who was quite unwell, and so she said that clearly the process of aging, including deterioration in health and reliance on medical treatment, as well as the experience of pain and the psychological stress, despair associated with the realities of aging, are implicated as the factors which most undermine older adults' quality of life. When I read that, I thought, well, that's really interesting, that's what she read into the whole survey. So what I did is, we have 2 teenage girls, and they had some friends over one night. So I just gave them the results of the survey, didn't tell them who it was, just said this was given out as a survey. Tell me what you think. What do you think is the outcome? And so what they did is that these are the things that they talked about in terms of what they thought was really important. And you know what their take was? Because they're in their late teens, early 20s. Their take was that these people were bored. That these people were seriously bored, and they needed something meaningful to do in their life. Now, isn't that interesting? That the person who was in her late 50s, early 60s saw the realities of this terrible life coming, and the teenagers saw that this person was bored. It was the same group of people. So even when we're doing research, your view of how you see people actually determines the way you interpret your data. So your lens will drive that. So isn't that interesting? that these guys are bored and the other person is the despair over the realities of aging. How could you be interpreting the same data just because you're thinking who that data's come from? So again, if you're designing for an end user who you believe needs to be cared for, is a little bit not really of value, whatever, this is what you get. I Googled active aging, pictures of active older adults, and that's what I got. They're active because they're outside the house. I wouldn't say that sitting on a bench is particularly active. So is there an alternative lens? Let's say that if you come from what people crave is coming to work feeling that they're adding value, if you change your lens around older people and you put it to participation, supported by health and security, so what happens if participation was important? What happens if you changed that view that older people are of no value, but they were of value way into life? Would you design differently? So who is old? That's the question. In terms of if you're doing designing, there's me at 54, there's my mother who's 80 who's working full-time, and there's cousin Mildred at 94 who runs the church. So which one of us is not working? Which one of us has no value? Which one of us is going to hang out with Homer? So I guess what I'm trying to say to you is be careful about who you think the end user is, regardless of what context you are, whether this is equally as relevant if you're designing for young people or you're designing for people with disability or whatever. It's your view of what is old will drive what you do and how you design. I tell you, cousin Mildred thinks I'm a teenager, and and my mom is still working. She's a full-time professor at university and is a professor of math. So she's working full-time and doing stuff. So again, at 80, where is old? So it's all about your expectations. It's all about treat a man as he is and he will remain as he is. Treat a man as he can and should be, and he will become as he can and should be. So if you're designing for people, for example, the things that you're doing with people, you've got her, and clearly she's halfway up the stairs. You can run up and actually pick her up with your IT systems. You can pick her up and you can carry her up those stairs. But will she ever try those stairs again? Probably not, ever try them again. Or you can walk up next to her and talk to her and ask her if she wants a hand, and you can design something that gives her support. Or you can just stand behind her, and if she does fall, you pick her up, and you can design for that too. So you need to think about how you're designing and the impact it actually has on the people you're designing for and with. Again, if a young person, exactly the same. It's the user will react to how you perceive them. So if you think about designing for these people, how do you think Homer is going to hang out with the Queen? So again, think about challenging the way you see your end user. This is a retirement village. I don't know whether you have retirement villages in Sri Lanka, but a retirement village is where older people come together and live in one area. And what this is this is in Canada, and what they've done is the innovation in retirement living is that basically that's a 5-star hotel. They've got a swimming pool, they've got a gym, they've got a restaurant. It's just similar to here, basically. It's all that. So I don't really think that's particularly innovative, is it? Having a 5-star hotel, the innovation is that it's that crosswalk there. I don't know whether you can see where it says 17. It's got a crosswalk across there. That's their innovation. Now that goes to something. It's the support to get people to something. So what do you think that might be taking them to? What would that support, what would that walkway be taking them to? Any guesses? I'll wake you up again, you got to respond to me. What do you think that walkway would be going to? A couple of options. To transport, like to buses and trains, and yep, that's one option. What's another option? The morgue? Oh, the mall. The mall, yes. Shopping centre. So the shopping centre is another one. What else could it go to? So transport, it could go to a shopping centre. What else? A hospital. Yep. What else? Anything else? What about a university? It could be going to a university. Yep. So if that is, and ICT is just the same. ICT is a walkway to various things, isn't it? So let's talk about this walkway. If that walkway takes you to transport, what is that saying in our expectations about those people that are living there? That they're going places, isn't it? They've got places to go, things to see, people to engage with. Yep. If it's a shopping mall, what does that say about them? They've got places to go, things to do, people to see, and they're going to shop and they're going to do things. If it's to a university, what does that say? That they can learn, that they can teach, that they can research, that there's an interaction between them and the students, yeah? If it goes to the hospital, what does that tell you? It tells you they're sick and they're going to die, doesn't it? You don't want to know who's crossing that walkway if it's a hospital, do you? The reality is it's a hospital. That's where that takes you. That, in fact, I think that's a waiting room to the hospital. And when you said morgue, basically there should be another one going straight to the morgue. Because these people are looking out their window every day at the hospital. So when you're designing your ICT, think about what link that you're doing and what you're creating for people. Because if you're designing health and it's for older people, and the way you design it, they're looking at the morgue, basically. Yeah, the comment is around the retirement villages, and it's about being part of family and staying part of family, and I absolutely agree with you. And it's also staying part of your community. So I'm not in favour of these retirement villages at all, and because I think it actually does. It becomes a waiting room. Basically, you might as well put the incinerator at the top, I think, because it's that's what you're saying. So think about, I borrowed from, here we are. So what are your expectations? What are your expectations? So when you're designing and when you're developing things, what is the lens or view of the customer? What do you think about them? What do you personally think about the person or the end user? Maybe you're designing for teachers. Maybe you're designing for business people, maybe you're designing for young people, but think about what it is that you think about them and challenge what it is that the assumptions that you have. Also, what is your interaction with the customer? Who decides what the problem is? Do you decide what the problem is? And how do you know that that's actually the problem? So who decides what the problem is? And what is the message your product sends to the customer and to society? You guys are very powerful. You have a very powerful role in society. The speaker this morning gave you that message as well, and I'm giving it to you again. He talked about sustainability, and I'm talking about society. Society will get messages about them, and they will be driven by what you produce and how you interact with them. So I'm just going to borrow from Microsoft HoloLens, who says, when you change the way you see the world, you can change the world you see. So I want to challenge you in the way that you see the end user and think about how you create your ICT to support people and what you're supporting them to do. So thank you.